where does governance come from? It comes from leadership. What is leadership? One of the great holes of Indian thinking about public life is that very few of our frameworks of leadership are actually Indian. How can we compete if the framework itself is not ours? You see, we cannot fight only on anecdotes. We cannot fight only on the stories when the framework itself is not ours.
Governance is different from a larger political imagination, and both are very important. Once that political direction has been set, then it is your job to govern. And let me say, West Bengal did a very successful Operation Barga, which transformed lives for the first 10, 15 years. But they couldn't continue it beyond that because you can't continue on agriculture forever and forever and forever. So governance has a certain role, politics has a certain role, and we must not confuse these roles.
I'm from Mumbai. I'm a Mumbai boy, so it's like a homecoming for me.
Welcome back home.
Thank you, thank you. So how's the Josh this morning? Sunday morning. Yeah? It's, thank you for being here. Hi, okay, that's great. So while we wait for Ashwini Bideji, we'll start without much ado. And Dr. Chopra, I want to tell you about this time that I was in Pakistan. And I want to start this story with Pakistan because when we talk about governance, it's thought to mean good governance is like, it's like a oxymoron. I'm just supposed to see all governance is good, right? But, on our doorstep, we have an example of bad governance, if you can put it that way. I was at this lunch hosted by a Pakistani politician many years back. And he told me, and this was the year that we got our own rupee symbol. So that was like a big thing for them. Oh my God, the Indian economy is on its way now. So his point was that, the difference between you and us is that our father of the nation died soon after independence. And we were left orphaned at independence. And you are what you are today because, you had political continuity and, all of that. So I want to ask you this because your book, We the People, talks about that very tumultuous time after partition, 1947. And of course, Hindol's book talks about that as well, about that personality who stitched India together literally. How important is political leadership in this process of good governance? And especially in the making of those choices that you make, that you, on the one hand, you have we the people, and across the border you have we the armed forces before the people.
Thank you very much, Sandeep. This looks like a totally in-syllabus question. Not expected from you. I thought you'll ask something very difficult. The fact is, you see that India was very fortunate in having a political leadership, but more than that, India was very fortunate in having a very strong national movement. Let's realize that, and when I talk about the Congress today, I won't be talking about the Congress as the Congress is today. Political parties are he's or she's.
Hindol?
Or it.
He's, she's,
Third
they.
gender, they. So we'll use the they gender.
It all depends.
It all depends.
In the morning, it might be it. In the evening, it might be they. It all depends.
It all depends, the time of the day. Any case. So you see, the fact is that the history of the Indian National Congress and the history of the ICS and the IAS are also related. You see, because one of the first demands of the Indian National Congress, very first session itself in 1885 was that the ICS examination should also be conducted in India. So one is that the Indian political leadership, in which I'd include the entire camo of Indian leadership, they're very clear that a strong nation becomes strong not only because of the elected leadership, but also because of those who are professionally asked to run it. And therefore, it was the long-standing demand of the Indian National Congress that the ICS exam should also be held in India. And the first ICS exam was actually held in India in 1922. In fact, I must mention the contribution of Mumbai city or Bombay city to the ICS, because Mr. Tata used to give a scholarship to every aspirant who would go and sit for the ICS exam. Now, having said that, the main reason why Pakistan took the way it took and we took the way that we took was that India was a land of very strong political contests. And the four strong people whose contribution to making India is competing scopes. For example, Mahatma Gandhi's views on the civil service, Patel's views on the civil service, Ambedkar's views on the civil service, and Nehru's views on the civil service were all quite different. And yet it was agreed and felt that we need to have a civil service. Though Pakistan also got a civil service, they also got the same civil service. But I, after putting in 36 years of service, can very clearly affirm that it's political leadership which makes all the difference. I mean, not all the difference, but I would say about 70-80% of the direction comes from the political leadership. And if the political leadership gives you the freedom, gives you the leeway, then you are on the pathway of making a great country. Otherwise, you will still grow. The advantage of a bureaucracy is that you will continue to grow, whether you grow at 40 kilometers an hour, or you grow at 60 kilometers an hour, or you grow at 100 kilometers an hour, depends on the sort of leadership that you get. One more point. You see, it is actually a combination of three factors. There is Prabhushakti, which is the power of the legitimate sovereign. I use the word legitimate sovereign. The Prabhushakti, which is then aided by the Mantranashakti. Here, Mantrana stands for the administrative and the policy Shakti. And the third is the Utsahashakti. Utsahashakti comes in because the civil services and the army, every year we inject fresh people and every year we let some people get away. So I think it is this wonderful combination of Prabhushakti, Utsahashakti and Mantranashakti. All nations which have these three Shaktis together, that's the tripod which makes for a great nation.
Of course, you forgot Nari Shakti.
Nari Shakti is there in all the Shaktis. Right. Nari Shakti, Prabhu Shakti does not exclude Nari Shakti. Mantrana Shakti does not exclude. So it's an all-inclusive thing.
All encompassing.
So you can't arrogate to yourself or to us this thing.
Right. Fascinating overview. Dr. Chopra, thanks for setting that up. But Hindol, I want to go back again to this thing of where we are, where we've arrived as a nation. There is a certain civilisational continuum to all of this. There is one school of thought that believes, India did not exist before 1947, and we are today what we are because of that one single freedom movement. And before that, it was all chaos. And after 47, it was the Bharat Ek Khoj, the discovery of India. India was discovered post 1947. But there is a civilisational continuum to this, and in fact, that's the topic of your next book as well. You want to talk more about this, where we are today?
Thank you so much. I've had long conversations with Dr. Chopra about all these things too. So, look, I don't know this idea that India only began in 1947 and, everything that we are comes from that moment, as vital as that moment is fundamentally flawed. This is a colonial narrative. This narrative, all historical records show that this is fundamentally a British narrative that was, in a sense, put into India's pedagogical and narrative sort of stream by the British. Now, that Indians, of course, lovingly embraced it is a different story. But as we embraced lots of other strange things, but there is no doubt, no one who has done any serious historical work would disagree that this narrative that India only began in 1947, in a sense, was a colonial construct. In fact, the founding fathers and the founding mothers, we always forget the mothers because they were women too. The founding fathers and the founding mothers, if you read them, none of them said that India began in 1947. Not one. And this is across the political spectrum. You may read Patel, you may read Nehru, you may read Ambedkar, you may read Maulana Azad. No one is suggesting that. Not one person. None of our founding mothers and fathers, the people who built the independent Republic of India, ever said that this is our founding moment and before this we were nothing. Not one of them. In fact, one of the things, one of the papers I wrote when I was at Oxford was showing that even though we think of Savarkar and Nehru, and indeed they were later in life, as divergent political thinkers, at the inception, if you read both Savarkar's Essentials of Hindutva and Nehru's Discovery of India, their conceptions of the nation at its origin are remarkably similar. They're remarkably similar. And you read anybody, you even read people who were away from the sort of mainstream of politics and yet very connected to the nationalist movement. I'm thinking at the moment of people like Aurobindo, right? they all agreed that fundamentally there was, as Sandeep says, there's a civilizational continuum. Now, this, of course, and in classic Indian style, everybody got very excited when Diana Eck wrote this book. Diana Eck from Harvard wrote this book called Sacred Geography. Now, Vivekananda was talking about sacred geography 100 years before Diana Eck. Aurobindo was talking about sacred geography. Even if you don't want spiritual figures, Radha Kumud Mukherjee, the great historian, was talking about sacred geography. But of course, as we in classic Indian style, the moment there was a Western stamp about it, everybody in Latin Zelly became very happy. They were like, "Ye satya hoga," right? So this is a fundamental lack of confidence that is drilled into our very bloodstream. It has taken 20 years of liberalization for some of this to go, and I hope more will go. I also want to make the vital point that if you look at India and the ideas that we talk about today, whether it's democracy, my friend Sanjeev also likes to talk about this, democratic ideas had their own inception in India's ancient past. We never talk about this. We only talk about the Greek model. We never talk about the Indian model. We do not talk about, I teach my students this today, we do not talk about Indian ideas of sustainability. You look at the port cities of Dholavira, Dholera, and Lothal, which is now being rebuilt in Gujarat, right? One, of course, is next to a main water body. The other two are port cities. These were some of the most important ports of the ancient world. Pliny the Elder, the Roman historian, is complaining that ships leaving your very city, and I consider myself part Mumbaiker too, we still have a home here, and I used to live here for 5 years when I worked in television in the city. But ships leaving, these harbors, western harbors of India, were doing some of the most exciting trade with the ancient world, with Rome. All of this history, we have slowly taken away from our construct of what the nation is. And, we're talking about governance today. We began there. I want to ask all of you, and we should think about this. Where does governance come from? It comes from leadership. What is leadership? One of the great, holes of Indian thinking about public life is that very few of our frameworks of leadership are actually Indian. I remember sitting in Columbia University when I went to business school there and attending this class that they make everybody attend called LEAD, thinking that not a single example or case study in that class was from any other place but the West. 95% were American, 1 or 2 were European. So they do not think of leadership in any other way but their own constructs and framework. How can we compete if the framework itself is not ours? You see, we cannot fight only on anecdotes. We cannot fight only on the stories when the framework itself is not ours. I teach international relations, and one of the fundamental things when you start to teach international relations or study it, you realize that the entire framework and theorizing was essentially developed by the West, primarily by America, to project its own power after the Second World War around the world. That is in a sense, the genesis of it all. There were, of course, other things also, but that's, in a sense, a part of the core. Now, we are fighting battles on somebody else's battlefield, using somebody else's weapons. We do not have, in leadership, anybody who's gone to a leadership class will know that there is this great concept called servant leadership, right? Written by this great American, leadership coach and scholar and so on and so forth. Do you know, because I do a lot of work on religion also, do you know in the Vaishnavite tradition that being in a sense a servant, not just to the divine, but to every being around you, is a fundamental path to leadership, is really one of the pillars of Vaishnavite thinking. It's just that no Indian bothered to take that and say, look, here is servant leadership as we thought of hundreds of years ago. Because that's not what we do. We think of all of these frameworks using somebody else's lenses. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't embrace the best from every part of the world. Sure, we should. But I am saying all our frameworks, even today, including in governance, come from a borrowed structure. You know, when I wrote my book about Sardar Patel, some people told me, oh, you know, Sardar Patel, you know, what do you think he did? I was fond of saying that, you know, and this session is called Bharat Ek Khoj, that people like Sardar Patel didn't have to discover India. They knew what was India. There was no discovery required. तो उनको खोजना नहीं पड़ा भारत को. वो जानते थे भारत क्या है. वो किसान के बेटे थे. He was a son of a farmer. He knew what is India. He didn't have to go for searching for India. I really think it's important that our children, at least in our children's generation, we stop searching for India and finally find it. Thank you.
Right. Very important points there. Hindol. You know, but Dr. Chopra, you know, coming back to Mumbai, the points that Hindol made, we'll of course take up further. But when you're in Mumbai, you know, I started my career here as a reporter for the Indian Express newspaper.
I also started my career here with the Times of India.
Economic Times.
Economic Times.
Yes. So while I used to cover city infrastructure, and the go-to person in those days was a young PWD minister who had the most outrageous ideas for infrastructure. And that young PWD minister is now in Delhi, is Nitin Gadkari. He came up with this plan for 55 flyovers and 1 expressway. And people are questioning, why do we need expressways? This was in the mid-90s. And he, in one of the meetings, he explained, you know, what he was doing. And then he said, you know, there is that one project that we have in mind. That's the Trans-Harbour Link that was proposed in 1962, 30 years back then, 30 years back. This is the one project that will transform Mumbai. And he says, but 7 saal lagenge. So, you know, there, he didn't tell me anything beyond that, but I understood. He meant that this cannot be done in the lifetime of my government. Possibly the next time when we come back to power, we'll probably take that up then. He didn't come back to power. The government didn't come back, right? But when they did, 20 years later, they began that project again. And that was inaugurated by the Prime Minister last year, January of 2024. 60 years after the original consultant had submitted that report. So here's my question to you. I mean, we spoke about how political leadership is really important to drive good governance. How important is political continuity in India for governance, for simple things like infrastructure, to know that you need good roads and railways?
The issue here is that, see, political continuity could mean two kinds of things. We had a great political continuity in West Bengal, but that perhaps did not deliver results. So, you know, I don't know, because there are states like Rajasthan which have a turnover every 5 years. Maharashtra has also had a turnover every 5 years. Punjab has had a turnover every. So I don't think it is turnover which makes the difference. What matters is, and you see, let us also understand that the political narrative changes with time. The political narrative changes with time. There are some very visionary leaders and they succeed. Sometimes they don't succeed. Sometimes populism. You see, there is no one-size-fit-all for politics. Right. There is no one-size-fit-all for politics. But I must mention here that there is a continuity in administration. There is a discontinuity in politics, but there is a continuity in administration. And let me emphasize the significance of that continuity also. It is not that from the times of Chandragupta, when we had our, regimes for collecting, ultimately what is governance? Governance is collection of taxes, maintenance of revenue, and saying that, Sandeep, this land belongs to you, and therefore it does not belong to Prabol. That is essentially what governance is about, right? And the other things are additions to it. The other things are there. So those are the essential things that have to be done. So there has been a continuity from that time to Todarmal, to the East India Company, the ICS, the IS, and all these things will continue. So there is one continuity which will always be there. And then there will be the ability to build on these fundamentals. As you said earlier, at the starting point, that if this fundamental is not there, other things cannot happen. You see, you need good health. So whether you play cricket or you play football or you play badminton, a certain amount of physical fitness is the sort of, basis of anything that you do. So that basis is and governance is different from a political imagination. Right. Now, I must make a point very clear, that governance is different from a larger political imagination, and both are very important. Both are very, very important. Once that political direction has been set, Once that political direction has been set, then it is your job to go on. And let me say, West Bengal did a very successful Operation Barga, which transformed lives for the first 10, 15 years. But they couldn't continue it beyond that because you can't continue on agriculture forever and forever and forever. So governance has a certain role. Politics has a certain role. And we must not confuse these roles. I mean, a lot of times, a lot of people, I used to also think that no, we don't make policy. Our job is to contribute to that policy. I mentioned very clearly that Mantrana is very different from Prabhushakti. And Prabhushakti in democracy comes from the people. That Prabhushakti is absolutely important. The Indian freedom movement had the advantage of people backing it up. You see, and without mincing words, what is the Muslim League compared to what the Congress was? I mean, the Congress of those days. The Congress of those days had Madan Mohan Malviya. The Congress of those days had Jinnah. The Congress of those days had, Acharya Narendra Dev. The Congress of those days had the CSP. They had everything in it. So Congress of those days was a national movement. Yeah. And that national movement had the backing of everybody. Yeah. So that is the difference between what happened to us and what happened to Pakistan. So Pakistan could not have, if Jinnah had survived another 5-10 years, you read Ishtiaq Ahmed's book on Jinnah, everything becomes very clear. He was not very clear about what he wanted. He hated the Congress. He hated Gandhi, but he was not entirely very fond of the Muslim state that he got. He called it a moth-eaten, truncated Pakistan. The moment he realized that Calcutta is not going to East Bengal, he forgot about it. So it's a very different story. But I thought we will concentrate on governance. And what I wanted to share with our friends here is that, what you measure in good governance keeps changing. I've been attending meetings, 36 years I attended meetings with the government. Now the focus has moved from BPL to ease of doing business. So I think that is the hallmark of governance. Today when the Prime Minister holds a Pragati conference with the Chief Secretaries and the Secretaries, the focus is on, is it easy to do business? If your state can get business to be done, then you are doing well. If you cannot do business well, then you are not doing well. So while populism is important to win elections, and let me again point out, Sandeep, that if you are in the business, and I'll hold that true for media as well, what is the media churning out? You get an advertisement, you cut out your cover story, right? You will do it.
It has been done.
It has been done in the past. So, populism is important because if you don't win elections, what the hell are you in politics for? So if a package is being given by A or by B or by C, it's like Campa Cola, Coca-Cola, Pepsi. It's the same junk.
I'm going to come to populism a little bit.
Right, okay. But let's quiz Hindol. I'll have some water till then.
but Hindol, go ahead.
No, please go.
So, fascinating overview again, Dr. Chopra. Hindol, on the way in, we were talking about the whole of government approach. And it's interesting, Dr. Chopra mentioned that how at 1947 it was possibly the ease of staying alive that we were talking about. And today in 2025, we're talking about the ease of doing business. So we've actually come a long way in the last 75 odd years. But we were talking about the whole of government approach. And I asked you whether it was how you spelt whole, W-H-O-L-E or H-O-L-E. And the fact is that, there's this misconception that the government of India is bloated, it's overstaffed, there are too many people doing so much, therefore we need, to cut down on government, we need to, absolutely streamline government. But then what we see is that the policy making level where expertise is required, there's a hole there, it's like literally a black hole of talent there. Where is the problem and how does this kind of affect us? If you're going to be the world's third largest economy by the end of this decade, where are your, administrators? Where are your lawmakers? Where are your technical experts, infrastructure experts, all of those technocrats that are going to help you, get there?
Before I answer your question, I just want to say that Dr. Chopra spent a lifetime in government. I only spent 5. One of the things I really understood after I met him was that I wish he was my secretary when I spent my 5 years in government. Because somebody needed to tell the joint secretaries that they don't make policy. I wish there was a Dr. Sanjeev Chopra telling the joint secretaries that they are not in charge of making policy. But anyway, be that as it may, look, in everything, of course, there are visionary leaders, like he said, and there are not so visionary leaders. But coming back to the point that you were making about lack of capacity, a lot of people talk about bloated government. Actually, I feel, and we've talked about this, in government, outside government, there is a capacity problem far more than being bloated, and it might be bloated in certain areas. But actually what we have today in government is a capacity problem. And that capacity problem is only getting more and more severe as we come into the age of AI and so on and so forth. Because a lot of policy executioners, if not makers, are not entirely familiar with the terrain that they're on. You are asking them to deliver policy that will impact millions of people, but are they entirely familiar of what are the terrain and what are the complexities they're dealing with? And what is happening because of that? We are becoming a government led by consultants. This is a very familiar picture in Delhi, that essentially, not just in Delhi, in state governments also, American consultancies have captured parts of government. This is the honest truth. Now that I'm no longer in government, I can say this.
You're a consultant now?
No, I'm not a consultant, thankfully. Thankfully, I'm not even a consultant. I am very far away now in academia, so I can say this. But it's true. If you look at various state governments and other, central government ministries, and there are entire chunks that are led now and run by external American consultants. And all of you know the names of those companies. There are only 4 or 5 of them. Everybody is aware of the names of those companies. And I actually feel that there are 3 or 4 major problems in this. One is a very baseline data security problem. If today my developmental data is being crunched every day by an American company, no matter what they say about how many people they have in India, is being crunched by an American company, there is a fundamental problem right there. Then there is a problem of access. And whether access can be monetized. That's another layer of problem. Then there is a problem of fundamental policy security. That's another problem. And policy prediction. So there are multiple layers of problems. How do I ensure that, consultants working, especially when they work for, a Western, big Western firms, who are embedded deep inside government, in various parts, especially in state governments. Please remember, everybody talks about the center in this country, but actually policy is delivered at the state level. This is something that a lot of people don't understand. The center only does that much. Your real policies that impact each of you and all of us, that is actually, most of those decisions are being made at the state level. And if large consultancy companies, Western consultancy companies, run parts of that state government, the policy part of that state government, it's a big issue. How do you know tomorrow that decisions that are being made for the future are not being crafted in a manner because of either malicious intent or perhaps just unfamiliarity with the terrain, which will impact, 10, 15, 20 years later? So we don't know these things, and that's become a big, big problem. Again, I want to ask the question, why has, of all the talent we have in India, why doesn't India build world-class consultancy companies? There is no answer. We have the IITs, right? Some of the best people of the IITs have gone to run some of the biggest global corporations, including technology corporations. You tell me, why do we not have 5 world-class technology consultancies from India? So there are lots of holes in capacity holes we need to fix. And I think we need to focus on that.
Absolutely. Capacity issues there, Dr. Chopra, as Hindol pointed out, in the fact that, you can't be held hostage to this quad of, if I can call it that, quad of consultants.
But let me assure you that there are some good Indian consulting companies. Probol is going to start one of them. Probol and... I said Probol is going to start one of those, with all of us in it. Okay, I think, he's 3 cheers for Probol. I mean, you're going to set up and this think tank will sponsor all literature festivals, right? I think, the point which Hindol has made is it hits the raw nerve. Now, let me explain. You see, you heard about lateral entry and about all the controversy about lateral entry. I think what we also forget is that, you see, there's a tripod again of politics, that is policy, the political leadership, the bureaucratic leadership, and the technical leadership. You see, now that the CDS has come in and you have a Department of Military Affairs in which the technical inputs are coming from a person who is and one of the problems in our country has been hierarchy. You see, because if you are the secretary, you think that the director of your department is not the same because the director is only an ex officio secretary, and many times not even an ex officio secretary is, you understand all these terms now. So I think what we need to strengthen both in the states and in the government of India is our technical directorates, much more than secretaries. You see, because a secretary, actually, frankly speaking, a secretary is like a good advocate. I mean, he has to transfer, he has to project the budget of his department onto the parliament or to the state assembly, defend his minister, make the budget speech of the minister, ensure that there are not too many uncomfortable questions that are asked about why is this and why is that. So the job of a secretary, in fact, when people say, how can you be health secretary today and agriculture, it's actually like holding a brief. I mean, you're a brief holder, right? So you can be a brief holder for, you can be a brief holder against. Actually, that is the task of the technical expert. It is actually, and when do these things, and I must compliment, I don't know what forget about other things. Mr. Sharad Pawar as a leader. I worked with him when he was the Agriculture Minister of India. And I think India achieved tremendous agricultural growth during his time. His time and the time of Green Revolution when we had, Swami Nathan and Subramanian and Sivaraman as the Agriculture Secretary, that was again a period of great. So what was happening was that he knew what he wanted to do. He was very, very trusting of the chief of the ICAR. The ICAR chief has to be not only at par, the agriculture secretary, our job is very different from the job of the ICAR. As the mission director of National Horticulture Mission, if I am not on first name terms and if I am not traveling with my horticulture commissioner, how can we do horticulture? Well, let me tell you that with two wonderful horticulture commissioners that I had, and those were transformative moments. Suresh Malhotra and Singh, Gorakh Singh. We were able to, transform India's horticulture. And in those 5 years, we were able to get more horticulture in terms of value, in terms of volume, and in terms of, everything is possible. But he cannot replace me and I cannot replace him. So these are three different roles. There's a role which Sharad Pawar has to do because he must get the money for the horticulture mission. Without him, money for the horticulture mission cannot come. The horticulture commissioner must be able to decide which is the best crop to be grown, where it is to be grown, which country to collaborate with, what do we need from Israel, what do we need from Holland, what do we need from France. But he will not be able to talk to the National Cold Chain Center. He will not be a good interlocutor with the FICCI or with the CII or with the chartered accountants or with making policies or with talking to the banks. That's my job. So it is when these three things work together that you have the transformation of horticulture. For that matter, horticulture is just an example. Whether it is transforming medical education, whether it's the talk of anything. So you need this combination. And I think while the country has a very fair system of selecting IAS officers, our system of selecting technical officers, especially at the state level, that is a major problem. So we do not have great directors of agriculture in the state. We don't have great directors of sericulture in the state. By the time they become the directors of sericulture, he's about, wanting to have his last paycheck or whatever. So we need younger people at that level. So if lateral entry is required, you need young directors of sericulture in state governments. You need young directors of Ayurveda in the state governments. So that is the one radical transformation which I would strongly recommend, and we are already working on that. I've had a discussion on this with the UPSC and with the Cabinet Secretary. Hopefully this should happen. And if that happens, then we will be moving to the next level. If that happens, then we won't need let's name them. We won't need Ernst & Young and Price Waterhouse and whoever. Come on, you name them. And you pass that, so it's all right. We'll have some new firms doing that. Okay.
I just want to make
one more. Yeah, sorry. Because in case that thing doesn't come, but one of the things which I wanted to share was, you see, India is a nation state which is in continuation of a civilizational state. The civilization of India, the civilization of Bharat is far more ancient. In fact, it is from times immemorial to a nation state. And I must add here that a nation state has a boundary. A civilizational state has language, identity, and culture. And there are no boundaries to that culture. There are no boundaries to that scripture. Right? So I think that is, you got to understand that India is a new nation state in an old civilization or an ancient civilization, and that is the context in which we have to put the framework of a country.
Absolutely.
I just want to make one small point, which is that there's another capacity issue, right? I mean, the best secretary I ever worked with in my short tenure was, and very sadly we lost him during COVID. Sir will know him well, the late Guru Prasad Mahapatra.
My friend from JNU.
That's right. Amazing, absolutely. One of the best bureaucrats we had. Very sadly, because of his own commitment, and many people told him not to go to the front line, but of course he wouldn't listen, and very sadly we lost him from COVID. Now, let me give you an example of where we lack in capacity. The government does very little research in the ministry level, right? 3 of the biggest research projects we took up in West India, looking at various issues including royalties and this, that and the other, were all done only because Guru Prasad Mahapatra was very interested in doing hardcore, deep research to understand issues at a fundamental level. It only happened, I'm absolutely not shy to say, it only happened because of his personal interest. Had it not been for Guru Prasad Mahapatra's personal interest, it would have never happened. So this sort of thing is our big, we are talking about all kinds of things within government, but the baseline is shaky. Do you know the RBI often does not share data, at least timely data, with ministries. Ministries don't share data among each other. So therefore this nodal ministry for cooperation among ministries was very necessary, because one of the big hurdles is that even baseline data cannot be found and people are not sure. So this is a big problem. And the other, this reframing of India as a civilizational state is very, very critical. Of course, it's the subject, of my next book too, but it's long awaited in a sense. And we cannot think of India's nationhood without thinking of the civilizational context in which India's nationhood can be applied. And it would be futile for us to think this. For the simple reason, when I was in college, these were the days when Tom Friedman used to write books like The World is Flat. And as always, Indians would get very excited. These were the days when we were told, my students laugh today, but it's really true. And many of us would remember this. There was this theory called the Golden Arches theory, which said that countries which had, and Sandeep, I'm sure, it was all over the press.
It was disproved during the Kargil War, which General Joshi was part of.
It said that essentially because of globalization, countries that have McDonald's of all things in the world supposedly don't go to war with each other. These were the sort of ideas of globalization that were sold to us as flattening. In fact, cultures don't want to be flat in that manner. No culture wants to be flat. If the end goal of globalization is that we all become burger-eating and jeans-wearing Americans, then we don't want to be that. I want to be a jeans-wearing, burger-eating Indian. I don't want to be a jeans-wearing, burger-eating American. Taking all cultural context only from one dimension. In fact, it's not even the entire dimension of America. One dimension of America. So this end goal of cultural flattening is a fundamental problem, and we are today at this point in the world today where Giorgia Meloni is saying she believes in Western civilization, and Western civilization is based on this, that and the other. The other day I met the Mexican ambassador who was saying, don't you think Mexico is also a separate civilization? People are fundamentally realizing that people want to be unique. I want to be able to wear a dhoti and a veshti and go to teach my students. One of the irritating things about that video that came out, among many things, with Trump and Zelensky, was this reporter asking him, why are you not wearing a suit? Who has told them that the suit is the only formal clothing? So this kind of cultural flattening, people around the world have pushed back against. This cannot be the end goal. In fact, India is a far better idea of what I call micro-globalization. Because we all realize Bengal has its own food, its own clothing, its own cultural attributes. So does Maharashtra, so does Andhra Pradesh, so does Tamil Nadu, so does Kashmir. And yet we are able to converse in the common language of nationhood. So in fact, I would argue we are a far more pluralistic example of what globalization should be, rather than the models that have been thrust down upon us in the last 30, 40 years.
Absolutely. Fascinating overview again, Hindol. The point that you made about islands of excellence and siloization, that just, captures what we are wrestling with today, as we are been several decades now. But, I want to ask you something, Dr. Chopra, about this. Bureaucracy does come to our rescue at times because,
Times.
No, when I say bureaucracy, I mean, the procedure-driven bureaucracy,
as long as there is oxygen, you don't realize that it is there. It's only when the AQI goes bad, that good governance is like a good fire brigade system. You don't need a fire every day. You don't measure the effectiveness of a fire brigade by the number of fires it has. It is how many fires have been prevented. Right. So factor that in now.
So the recent example being when Prime Minister Modi went to the White House and he was thrust upon that, he was given that offer which he never asked for, the F-35 fighter aircraft. And I was saying, oh my God, this is an aircraft we don't need right now, not the F-35. And then the Indian Defense Secretary, Mr. R.K. Singh, said the 6 amazing words that I heard last month, which is, the process has not yet started. I said, oh, we are saved another 10 years. We bought ourselves some time.
RK was my colleague in the Ministry of Agriculture, so we worked together. He's a very competent individual.
When a bureaucrat says process,
that's so it's a very safe way.
It saved our indigenous programs.
You can fast forward the process. You can shorten the process. The process is. The very nature of the word process is a very interesting process. How do you process?
But there are times we take these decisions without realizing the kind of far-reaching impact that it would have on the people when politicians take decisions.
No, I think in fact, one of the other things that where this triad has worked very well, is the example of Kisan credit cards. Yeah. You see, the political leadership felt and had been feeling for a very long time that the farmers need a lower rate of interest. So this institution called NABARD is created. And with this institution of NABARD and the Government of India and the state governments and the revenue departments and the agricultural departments, today you have a 95% coverage of Kisan credit cards. Yeah. Now, without the foundation of this Kisan credit card, link it up with soil health cards, link it up with the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, and you cannot really double farmers' income. That's a political statement. But forgetting about that political statement, the fact is that we've been able to address this issue in a very big manner. Now, there's a political resistance to the reforms which the Prime Minister Modi wanted to bring, and I am on record saying that these reforms are good for the farmers. There's a lobby which does not want these reforms to be implemented. But again, if you have that sort of understanding, if you have that sort of thing, and if we can work together, we can really bring about the transformation of this country.
Absolutely. And there are those decisions that have been taken, like you said, the Kisan credit cards. I want to go back a few decades to the midday meal scheme in Tamil Nadu. That's completely transformed society in Tamil Nadu. It's led to so many, unintended consequences, all for positive, of course. But it all just started with one MGR saying that we need to feed, our students, school students, and that completely transformed development itself in Tamil Nadu. And so if you go back to these kind of very, very far-reaching decisions, like you would say liberalization is one decision that we took somewhere in the 90s. You can debate about how that came about or whether it was an emergency surgery that you had to perform. But by and large, there's been political consensus around liberalization. I don't think there's any government that says that I'm going to go back to the glorious socialist days, what it was like.
See, what has happened today is that in every political party, there's an element which says go back. But there are many elements which say don't go back. So you have within the BJP, RSS, you have a Swadeshi Jagran Manch. Yes. Within the Congress, you have some, maverick voices.
That's what Hindol writes about. I mean, that's how we have always been throughout history.
Okay. So I think the majority view is, and in fact, let's not forget the contribution of Rajiv Gandhi to computerization.
Right.
And Sam Petroda may be a bad term to use today for whatever statement he
full
made.
Entertainment.
Full entertainment, right? Without the tax. But But his contribution then in the mid 80s towards thinking that telephones can become can be for everybody. So I think we keep evolving, we keep making some mistakes along the way. But on the whole, I think this continuation. I mean this IAS, ICS continuity, and now with with the state civil services emerging in a very big way. Because today about 30 to 40% of our, and in fact today state civil services are also becoming directors, they're becoming secretaries to the state government, which is very good. So I think we're on the right track.
You're on the right track indeed, and
I just want to say
Dr.
one
Chopra,
thing.
I'll just finish. I know the challenge in a country like ours, the world's most populous country, is that on a newspaper, on one page, you will have an advertisement on how to use UPI about a decade ago, almost 8 years back. And the next page, you will have an advertisement on how to use a toilet. Something as basic as that. These are decisions we never took 50, 60 years back. Today, you're building toilets and you're, spurring a digital revolution. But Hindol, you have a point to make.
I was just saying, beginning with what Dr. Chopra said at the beginning of this session, that I am of the firm belief that India, of course, is the birthplace of many, many things in the world. But we should also claim that we are the birthplace of woke ideology. Let me say how. We are the country which first invented, and Indian politics is the first place that invented, that we can identify as various things. Today, I can identify as a socialist. Tomorrow, I will identify as a capitalist. Something else will happen. I will identify as something else, right? The same person, the same politician, the same leadership can identify as various things at various parts of their, various parts of the day also. I can be socialist in a, when
I go to Calcutta,
I go to Calcutta.
capitalist when I come to Mumbai.
I come to Mumbai, South Bombay, I become a capitalist. Yeah. Then I become a farmer, when I go to some other place. So we identify, we are very comfortable. That's why you'll see we were not much affected by all of this Americanism. Because we understand this. Yes. We are comfortable with our, multiplicities, so to speak.
Absolutely.
We drink our scotch in steel glasses.
Yeah, we are comfortable with these multiplicities. But the other thing about the point you were making about toilets on one page and UPI on the other. Look, my father spent his entire lifetime building metro rails, right? Calcutta built the first line and then for some reason stopped for like 20, 30 years, right? So, and yet because of Mr. Sridharan, my dad and his colleagues were able to build the entire Delhi metro in record time. Yes. So it all depends also on the person at the helm of it all, and very importantly, political, pressure and backing. But I also think we should be comfortable at a level now by these dichotomies of, toilets on one page and UPI on the other. Because remember, we do not have a linear progression model anyway. We have a sort of leapfrog model. That's why we never went, before we went to a phone in every household, we went to mobile phones. We never went to, landlines didn't spread that way in India. We straight away went from STD booths to mobile phones. Also, I think philosophically, there is also a fundamental thing it's important for us to understand. You see, we in our civilization look at time in a cyclical way. Whereas in the West, they look at time in a linear way. These are two fundamental dimensions that impact the way we look at the world. We know that at the end of the day, it is a cycle. We will come to that same point once again at some point or the other. And therefore, no matter how much we want to think that, we will never... That's why history is alive for us. That's why when, American scholars and British scholars said Sanskrit was a classical language, a lot of us objected because classic in that tradition means dead. You put it in the museum, you look at it nicely. Whereas Sanskrit is an alive language, it's alive among us today. Millions of people said mantras in Sanskrit, taking a dip in the Mahakumbh. Every day, millions of people say Sanskrit when they say the Gayatri mantra in their homes. So it's alive for us. And therefore, we are very comfortable with this idea that we live side by side with multiplicities, so to speak.
Absolutely. And India is a civilization that, lives simultaneously across centuries, if you can say that. But, fascinating discussion, gentlemen.